A warm welcome to everyone this evening for this wonderful event. I'm very honored to introduce the renowned curator Rose Issa and the academic Lucia Sorbera. So this event ends a series of art exhibitions called Arabicity and Ourouba, which really reflects on the aesthetic, the conceptual and socio-political concerns of artists in the Arab world over the past 4 decades. It looks at the new shape of women's street art and the challenges they face, and the legacy of feminist revolutionary art. So Rose Issa has curated this exhibition starting, I think, in 2009, which started at the European Parliament. It's then traveled around. It went to the Blue Coat Gallery in Liverpool.
Different versions of it.
Different versions of it, yes. And then it was in Beirut as well. And it's culminated in this publication called Arabicity, which came out by Saqi in 2019. Now, her focus is on artists, including Bahia Shehab, who explore themes related to memory, identity, destruction, reconstruction, conflict, and peace issues affecting the Arab world in light of the 21st century upheavals. Rose Issa is a really well-known and loved curator, writer, and producer in London and beyond. She has championed visual arts and film from the Middle East for more than 30 years. And I used to be an editor of the Middle East and London magazine, and I was always so excited when you said yes, when we wrote to you and asked if we would ask you to write about an artist and introduce a new artist to our audiences. So I've been following your work for many years. She's lived in London since the 1980s, showcasing upcoming and established artists, producing exhibitions with public and private institutions worldwide, and running a publishing program. So through curating numerous exhibitions and film festivals, she's introduced Western audiences to many artists who've become stars of the international scene, as well as holding exhibitions at Rose Issa projects in London. She frequently co-curates exhibitions with international, private, and public institutions. She's also the founder of the publishing unit Rose Issa Projects and Beyond Art Production, and she's published monographs and comprehensive catalogs addressing the current concerns and trends of contemporary visual arts from the Arab world, including many publications, but including this one, Arabicity. I'd also like to introduce Lucia Sorbera. Lucia is the chair of the Department of Arabic Language and Cultures at the University of Sydney, where she's also a fellow researcher in the Laureate Program in International History. Her research focuses on the history of modern and contemporary Egypt from a gendered perspective and the artistic and cultural productions of women across the Arab world and its diasporas. She is currently curating with Stephanie Hemmelrich Donald and Omid Tafigian a special issue on refugee filmmakers. And this is for the journal Alphaville. She's curated the Arab Women Film Festival at the University of Sydney and has been really working with a number of people on that has traveled from the Torino Book Fair in Italy, focusing on the literary and artistic vanguards from the Arab world and diaspora since 2016. And I've just learned that she's been traveling extensively doing this work all over the world during her summer holiday from Australia. So my name is Catherine Spellman-Poots, and I am I'm a visiting associate professor at Columbia University. I'm also on faculty here at the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilisations here at the Aga Khan University, and I'll be moderating the session tonight. So what we have planned is we'll listen to both speakers for 20 minutes each or so, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. I'd also like to feature this wonderful book that we're celebrating this evening. This is At the Corner of a Dream, A Journey of Resistance and Revolution, The Street Art of Bahia Shehab. And you all have on your seats information on how to grab hold of a copy of this book. And we also warmly invite you to look at the exhibition following tonight's discussion. It will be open late, so you can all go in and look at the exhibition following the events. So thank you so much. And we'll start with you, please.
I'm not going to read. I decided that I'm not going to prepare a text, though we're in a university, because there have been publication, and whatever I want to say, I usually write it. And I'm better in writing than by saying it. But however, because initially they invited me to do a conversation with Bahia herself, Bahia Shehab, the artist who teaches at the American University of Cairo, I would like to start with what she focused on, which was her PhD on the 1,000 ways of saying no. She did wonderful research on all the different scripture, the typography and everything that was done from beginning of Arabic letters to now in different fonts and so on. So, sorry, let me see if this one goes up. We tried it. So these are the different labs she did, and these are the graffitis since the text of our conversation changed to street art. These are the images of her work. Of course, the blue bra is one of the elements that many artists have used because it was used on a woman in Egypt who was arrested and she was veiled and the policeman opened her and that blue bra became one of the la malef, the shape of the letter no in Arabic. But for the street art, there are many people who have done researches. I don't know, Lucia, if you have seen that film. It's a documentary about women's street art in Egypt. I recommend it. You can go on Vimeo and download it and see it. So it's also about names like Mira Shahade. It is mainly on the subject of harassment and equality and so on. But the first no that I know about is of the last 40 years, let's say, because I only work with living artists, is Youssef Shaheen's film, Al-Asfur, The Sparrow. And the woman that you see here is the story of the Six-Day War in 1967 and the major defeat that was really the biggest depression for the Arab world. And in the film, you see this woman whose name is Bahia. I think Bahia was named after that film, who says no to the resignation of Nasser, because Nasser goes to the TV and after the defeat says wants to resign, and the whole of population goes in the street. Millions of people go in the street and object to his resignation. Anyhow, that I think if I was her parents, I would have taken it from that film because it's a big no. Of course, many artists, in some ways or another, have said no. Mona Hatoum, for those of you who know it, Over My Dead Body, has mentioned it. Janan El-Ani, who is here in the room, about the cliches and stereotypes that people have of the Arabs. She's half Iraqi, half Irish. And these are, for me, the many major work who have said no to the cliches, no to the, of course we can ask her always. Ali Omar Hermes, a Libyan artist who lives in London, and who has been saying also no to injustice, double standards. In all his writings, he's not a calligrapher, though he works only with letters, and not sentences mostly, but he quotes other poets who said no, whether it's 13th century, 11th century, or his own contemporary poetry. And he has done many versions of it that I have exhibited in different exhibitions. This went to the Written Foundation. Nermin is not here, no. Nermin Hammam, also an Egyptian artist who has done the blue bra. You can see it. She took the image of that blue bra and mixed it with digitally with the soldiers, with the Japanese paravent, to say, what we can see as a beautiful thing can be behind that scene restrictive. And we have many women artists in Egypt. This is the WOW group, which is Women on Walls Collective, who does a lot of the stencil work and images in the streets of Cairo. They don't remain long time. Sometimes, of course, they are very quickly covered. But it's about their rights, and Angie Balata is one of the founders of that group. But there are many other groups. You can Google them and you can find one of them is Noun El Niswa, which is in Arabic they call it graffiti harimi, the women's graffiti. And so there are lots of things really at the moment taking place since 2011. I don't know if some of these feminists, some of them look like Kulthum, maybe Hanan Ashrawi, or people who have been key figures of, but as you know, in the graffiti art, again, the idea of the blue bra comes here. Very few want to have their names known. Some of them are known, like Aga Tariq and Hind Henry, but very often they get death threats, of course, especially the bloggers. He is Hiba Hilmi, another person. And finally, we don't want to restrict ourselves because my thing is more about the rest of the Arab world. Also, Palestinian artists. Here it's the case of a performing artist, really, who is always herself in the pictures, from her feet in the cement where she cannot. A Muslim Palestinian artist who has only an Israeli passport that I can only invite to Europe, but I can never invite her in an Arab country when we do some of our exhibitions. So that's Raida Saad's wing caused in the walls of Palestine. Or other artists like Tagrid Darwood, a Lebanese woman who has worked a lot with the idea of bombs and because she was born exactly after the Civil War in 1976. So all she knew for over 20 years was wars and bombs, and a team that comes, and also other homages that she paid to the olive trees that in Palestine are cut if it belongs on the land of Palestinians in order to make it a land without people. So she painted a lot of olive trees. Usually she does skeletons, bombs, and cameras, surveillance cameras, but that's the first time she moved into more other artists here. Zuleika Bou Abdallah, Algerian, who also did many almost decorative zeligs. You know, zeligs are those ceramics that you do in Arabic with the plaster thing, with only mirages. So mirages, because the only things the young people know is about war. Whether you're in Iraq, from Syria, from Algeria, we have all grown up with wars around us. Another example of women concerned with wars and pressure is Batul Eskhine, Moroccan artist. Here she carves on all the domestic tools of home domestic, butagazes, cocotte minute, pressure cookers, the map of the word under pressure. It's a whole series she did on everything that can be, because you know a lot of accidents in most of the developing country happens with these butagazes and or pressure cooker and so on. So she carved in the map of the word. These are several exhibitions. At the moment, actually, if some of you cross over the street to the Wellcome Institute, they have some of her works in an exhibition called Human Nature. I forgot, sorry, the title, correct title, I should remember. But they have some of her works there. Nadia Sahnawi, a Lebanese artist who did a huge installation with hundreds of brooms, but with all the negative works, occupation, repression, terror, etc., that we have to clean up our countries. Years before actually the current demonstration in Lebanon. Some of these, most of these artists are in the book, but Katia Trabulsi, a woman who traveled, the Lebanese, who traveled, who lived a long time during the war in Dubai, in the Emirates, but is back in Lebanon, and who transforms all the bombs that they found, because you can find them very easily in each house. Each flat almost had received some, and decorates it with the craftsmen of each different countries, from China to Uzbekistan to Palestine to Lebanon and so on, with each specificity, craft specificity of the place. Susan Hefuna, for those of you who know the work of Egyptian German artist who works on the idea of mashrabiyya, which was the lattice. Here also you have lots of mashrabiyya on the glasses and so on. The same basis of the inside and the outside, the separation of women and men and so on. But in her case, she was so fed up of war, she wrote on the mashrabiyya, long mashrabiyya that now is in New York, Hayatu Bas, Life and Nothing Else, which is also a title of a Kiarostami's film, for those of you who have seen some of Kiarostami's film. But I didn't want to restrict that talk really to women. I'm a bit against gender separation, religion separation, ethnic separation. So I want also to involve men who talked about the concerns, whether it's aesthetical or conceptual or socio-political of our world. This is an Italian Nubian artist. Nubians, he used to have Sudanese-Egyptian passport, but now Italian, and now lives in Edinburgh, for those of. And he wrote specifically for me that for an exhibition I did in Beirut, Ourouba or Arab, whatever is the essence of being an Arab. And can you believe it? In Beirut, they didn't want the title Ourouba for the show, and the show was called Ourouba. So they wrote it phonetically with Aleph, for those of you, which is absolutely doesn't make sense. I was so angry that I asked him to just go and paint a huge wall at the entrance, which he did, and that was the wall, so that we have the title of the show and we could delete the wrong spelling, because in Beirut they thought it's associated with Nasser, with socialism, it's not the right thing, and so on. While in most of the very conservative Arab Gulf countries, they have streets called Ourouba Street. Many others who also criticize the whole of the region and the policies of the Arab. This is Ghader Atiyah, one of the very early works of his, where he criticized, how the focus of the Europe on oil and how they defend the Gulf countries just because of their very personal interest in money and oil. So he did videos with the sugar and blackened it, and many art of his wonderful artworks. We have here another of his work, instead of democracy, how democracy. He played with the work that even the word democracy is no longer what it used to be. So it's a no to democracy because it has changed a lot. Others like Palestinian artist Abdurrahman Qatanani, who is a refugee, Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, who was born there, but as a Palestinian, you never get the nationality, you can never buy land or flats or work and so on. And he works only with the elements that are in the camp, which is the undulated aluminium covers and barbed wire. So all his work is made with these materials of the camp. Actually, it is he lives still, and his family and friends, everybody. I went to this old hospital that was destroyed by Sharon in 1982, and they all live. They all have one of the hospital room as their flat in there still. Luckily, recently the French gave him a French nationality, so he can travel. Other works by him. So it is also about resilience, how you can repress a whole population. You can put them in camps, you can put them in ghettos, and so on. Despite that, all the kids in the stairs were playing, and all the work he has done is about, the resilience of the whole population. Other Taisir Batinji, an artist also from Gaza, who now lives in Paris, who also, instead of arms, he would like to have pen. Let's write, let's paint, let's, the different way of doing war and saying no. Or Ayman Balbaki, an artist also from Lebanon. I'm sorry that I'm doing that just because so that we can discuss maybe after your presentation the concept behind it and why these people. I know that for those who are not familiar with those names, it is like Rose is telling us just a few names and no interest. So you can stop me. I will go. I'm usually very quick on this thing. But it's about how many of the militia people, what we call the Fedayins or Mulatna, were also disappointed by what their leaders told them, and how their hopes is what they build up and not, what the government. Another is Mahmoud Abaidi, a wonderful Iraqi artist who lived in Canada and who recently went to Beirut, to Lebanon, I would say, and built up a new museum, Nobu Museum, wonderful, beautiful place. He is an architect also. And he decided that his kids in Canada were not speaking Arabic. He wants to take them in Arab countries, so he couldn't take them to Iraq. Syria was at war and so on. So he decided north of Lebanon. So he's now in north of Lebanon, something like 60 kilometers of north. And these are the things, if for those of you who remember the Iraqi journalist who threw a shoe to Bush when he was at the press conference. And it was one of the works that was most photographed, when I showed it in Beirut, most photographed on many Instagrams. That's the same, another work by him that I recently exhibited at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., how there is the word in Arabic is salam, peace. And he did it also in English, but he did it with swords, how the swords that sort of, he turns off swords, which are tools of war, and you see them still in the flags of Saudi Arabia, you know, turning it into peace, how we turn war into peace. Recently I saw a year ago a wonderful exhibition by Syrian artists, most of them really unknown to all of us, and many of them who are anonymous, collective anonyme, who did work also. This is the same letter, La Malef, which says no, you know, with all the wounded people in the whole area. I mean, when you think of Iraq, Syria, I mean, these are the places in the world after Lebanon and Palestine and everywhere. So it's all the different way of saying la, no. Also another, what, and maybe tomorrow? Another one, no, secession. And wonderful video work by Nadia Kaabi Link, Tunisian Russian girl, who did this thing in the church. It's two opposite things. One mouth asking always the question, like the questioner you were asked on the visa: are you a drug addict? Are you importing arms? And of course everybody says no. So this is the question, and everybody in that church before says no. So that is a video always asking a question, and which says how rubbish is the questioning, because it's, of course we're going to deny everything, even, you know, are you gay? Do you have AIDS? Do you have arms? Do you have this? Do you have? So it is always this sort of very saying no to everything. And finally, and more recently, the demonstration in Beirut in the last month or so, where everybody of all confessions, this is the first time, that from south to north, from west to east, from all cities, big and small, everybody, Muslim, Christian, and you see veiled women with the cross on their, are going and demonstrating to say no to this corrupt regime, to the main corruption. Actually, now that the banks have closed down, it's going to be a catastrophe for them. And finally, I want to start with something that also, because many of the artists, in fact, bring beauty in our life, with the Naila Romanos Ilya, who's also an architect, who moved from architecture to art, and who also uses these bombs. When you see the bases, these are things that everybody in their flat has at some stage received them, and transformed them into a tree of life, in fact. She calls that flower power, or make art, not war. And it's about also this Lebanese artist, therefore, who is trying to say, well before the demonstration, this was in September that I took this picture, so it was an installation in all the street art. It's not necessarily graffiti art that doesn't say, but it's also many artists, many architects are doing installation in the middle of the city in order to communicate with the public. On that base, I stop here because I got my 20 minutes, and I pass it on to you.
My job very easy.
And then we can ask questions. Thank you to you.
Thank you, Rose. That was overwhelming and really inspiring. And yes, I'm very happy to be here. It's a great privilege to share the floor with Rose and Catherine, and to have the opportunity to share some ideas about one of the artists that I find among the most inspiring of her, and I have to say also my generation. Like many of us, I first met Bahia Shehab through her artwork, which I started following since 2011, since the beginning of the Egyptian revolution. And I immediately found her work not only moving from a personal perspective. I really think that her critique of the systemic violence we live in globally, but also the way she weighs this narrative of violence with a stubborn and almost Gramscian optimism of the will captures everyone's hurt. And if you have visited her exhibition downstairs, you must have had a feeling of that. But I also find very significant for the research I've been conducting in the past 15 years on the history of Egyptian feminism, feminist activism, and intellectual productions. Her work, I read it in this line, in this genealogy. Since then, since I met her, I started a journey with Bahia that from Cairo, where she was organizing a conference on surrealism in Egypt, took us to Italy together, then to the United States, and now here, even if she's not here in person. But the good thing of being an artist is that you can be everywhere through your work. I would like to use the minutes I have here to situate Bahia Shehab's work in two broader and interconnected intellectual spaces. The first one is the long history of Egyptian feminism, a history that, as the historian Margot Badran has illustrated at length, began 1 century ago, and even before there was a name in Arabic to unequivocally mean feminism. And the second one is the history of the revolutionary decade that began in December 2010 in a small village in Tunisia, a decade marked by a series of popular uprisings whose origins need to be searched in the long history of the social movements, including women's movements, that developed along the 20th century with a dramatic acceleration in the 90s. And most importantly, a decade that is not over, as the current events in Iran, in Iraq, in Algeria, and in Sudan show, and the outcomes are not predictable. So, through an analysis of the works of Bahia Shehab and other women's artists and political activists with whom I did oral history, I will try to discuss how feminism informed their work, and on the other side, how the arts contributed to shape feminism that emerged in the 2011 revolution, what I call a new wave of feminism. But I also will try to find the legacy of the feminist histories in these works, and how contemporary feminist artists are facing the contemporary challenges. So the first two slides are interestingly the same that Rose chose, and are from, we start from before the revolution. And this exhibition is when she was invited to this exhibition in Germany to celebrate 100 years of Islamic art in Europe, and she said that as an Arab woman, she had nothing else to say that no. And that's, the first time I saw this installation, I could not help but thinking of centuries of Muslim women's patronage of the arts that contributed to build the Islamic heritage, but most importantly, that if a young Lebanese PhD student, a woman, dared to use this word, no, as the main thread of her exhibition, this was certainly thanks to the long century of Arab feminist activism that she inherited. And so I would like to read the artistic gesture of Bahia Shehab in relation to this heritage, intersecting her work with 100 years of no that I heard from Arab feminists, especially Egyptian feminists. So the first no, what was the first no that Egyptian feminists said? The first no was against the British protectorate, when they participated in the anti-colonial uprisings in 1919, organized the boycott of the British products, and lobbied for the liberation of the political prisoners, and denounced the violence of the colonial army against the demonstrators. Once Egypt obtained the semi-independence in 1922, they said no to the nationalist elites, the Egyptian nationalist elites, that not only excluded women from the suffrage, but they did not even invite Egyptian women's journalists to the ceremonies to open the Egyptian parliament. And there was a journalist, Susanna Barawi, who published an article in the first Egyptian feminist magazine, denounces the double standard of the Egyptian nationalist elites, because British and French journalist women were invited. Egyptian women said no to sexual violence and female genital mutilations long before the mid-90s, when these themes came to the agenda of the international organizations and the government institutions. In fact, the grassroots work of Egyptian women, doctors, and social activists, such as Maria Saad, goes back to the 50s and continued underground through the 60s and 70s. But as we know, these were a period where political activists had to keep a very low profile to avoid to be put in jail by the regime. And feminism was one of the movements who had to keep a low profile until the early 80s. Egyptian women said no to the manipulation and the exploitation of women and gender politics by the authoritarian regimes. I found testimonies about the 90s particularly interesting with this respect, when the Egyptian government sent an official delegation to the Beijing UN Conference on Women, and the independent NGO sent their delegates to run a parallel forum of NGO. And a senior member of one of these organizations told me, and here I quote, "We were the first organization to talk about violence against women from an holistic perspective. We were insulted by everybody, and we were considered as agents of imperialism. Even Susan Mubarak sent us a sort of ultimatum because we had a fieldwork about the perception of women, asking what is violence. We wanted to go to the Beijing conference to present this. Somebody come and say, the Hanem says you're not going to Beijing to wash your dirty laundry. Even if there is violence against women everywhere in the world, it doesn't exist in Egypt. But we were able to send 5 girls to Beijing, and they presented the results of the findings of the work, and they were attacked by the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs." And of course, Egyptian women activists were not only operating on the platforms of the so-called women's issues, but also in the fields of international politics, paying a high cost for that. They advocated for the freedom of Palestinian people since the late 30s. They called, a kind international conference for the defense of Palestine. In the 90s, they had a demonstration against the participation of the Egyptian army in the aggression of Iraq in 1991. Women demonstrated again in solidarity with the Palestinian peoples, and again in 2003 in solidarity with Iraq. Domestically, they have always been at the forefront of strong oppositions on the most controversial political issues, especially human rights and torture and corruption. And in the 90s, it was then clear to Egyptian women political activists, like those in the rest of the world, that women's issues were intersectional, and this implied also an overall reconsideration of what does it mean to be a feminist. So these are just few examples that allow us to understand Bahia Shehab's work in a longer feminist history, and also the 2011 revolution in a feminist perspective. Life stopped for 18 days, says Shehab, with regard to 2011. Other young artists shared the same feelings and ideas. I interviewed the artist Hind Hira, that Rosa just quoted, and she told me it was amazing during the 18 days. People were very kind and feeling something amazing happening, and there was no sexual harassment during the period. And this is something very strange and great. After the 18 days, it happened again. So Hind remembers the first actions against sexual harassment she took part in. And in her oral histories, she talks about everyday activism, both online and offline, the many experiences they had, and the interactions with the people. Interestingly enough, when I asked her if she thinks of herself as a feminist, she said that no, she's not. And this was quite common among young women in the first months of 2011. However, when I asked her to better explain me her political vision about gender, her answers can be read within a feminist agenda. And she says, for sure, it is a country full of justice, the one that I want, where there is education and freedom and expression for women. What I'm dreaming of for my daughter is a world where there is equality between the two sexes. So in relationship to the street art is also very much related to the revolution. And she said that she made street art to represent her identity in Tahrir Square and everywhere in Egypt. And when I asked her about women artists, she replied me without hesitation, everyone can do it. I don't think it depends on gender. I am brave enough to do it. So between 2011 and 2014, this is a garage in downtown Cairo where Hilda took me in 2014 to take photos of the graffiti. Art flourished in Egypt, in many cities, giving materiality to young people's desire to reappropriate the public space. Graffiti became a visual journal of the revolts. Women artists who, alongside writers and intellectuals, participated in the revolutions, both as activists, but most important as narrators, contributed to this new artistic wave by producing feminist narratives of this historical moment. Feminist Egyptian revolutionary art by high-profile artists such as Bahia Shehab, but also Hoda Lotfi, was produced in parallel to that of young emerging artists such as Hind Hira. So this was the moment where the revolution inspired a new turn also in Bahia Shehab's work. Meanwhile, I witnessed also feminist collectives and groups mushrooming not only in Cairo, but also Egypt. In 2012, many of the same young women who in 2011 were shying away from naming themselves feminists were part of the new feminist scene. And even more established women's organizations were extremely active in the public scene. These are June 2012, presidential elections were held in Cairo. And in this context, Bahia launched a campaign titled There Are People. And in her blog, she wrote that this was a moment where the mass sentiment was very low, and there were a lot of anti-revolutionary feeling in the air, even by people who were strong supporters of the revolution. And she said that she did this campaign to remind people of the aims of the revolutions and the sacrifices that they have made to get where they were. In August, she spread another campaign. We are still in 2012. Beware of speed bumps. And after the bump, she wrote, long live to the revolution. So this was a period where, in all my oral histories, where the most recurrent expression was al-thawra al-mustamirra, the revolution continues. Bahia conceived this campaign not only as a social responsible act, but also to warn that a new phase of the revolution was beginning, a phase where revolutionaries should have been aware of speed bumps and should keep the main aims of the revolution very clear in their mind. And she was prophetic in a way. I think this is one of the most moving campaigns that Bahia did in January 2013. In November 2012, in the village of Asyut, a train crashed into a school bus, killing 51 children. These kinds of accidents have always been brushed aside as random acts of chance. And the Minister of Transportation resigned. The families received small compensations, but there was a public outcry, huge public outcry. But eventually the kids were forbidden. Bahia writes that the details of this accident that circulated on social networks were still very vivid in her mind. And she wrote down a list of the names of the kids. She collected the names and grouped them into boys, girls, and families. I wanted to paint the sisters and brothers who died together so that they could come to life again on the streets of Cairo together. I painted each child working on a train railway. They are painted in black, but their wishes and dreams are painted in colors. So her aim was to maintain the kids in the memory of the people. 2012 and 2013 were extremely difficult years for women's political activists in Egypt. There were two orders of problems. On one side, the government, then was the Muslim Brotherhood, mobilized the conservative discourse on women and gender, even threatening to repeal the laws, the relatively progressive laws that women had achieved over the years, lobbying and doing hard work, and the negotiations also with the regimes. In addition, the state recurred more and more to violent collective rape to attack women's demonstrators. And clearly this was not a new technique. In the last years of the Mubarak regimes, the same things happened. However, the number of demonstrations in 2012-2013 was far higher, and so women were much more exposed to rape. So Bahia features these themes in her art, particularly in a series of graffiti where she challenges the notion of women's bodies as aura, so something to be covered or to be ashamed of. But the violence did not end with the end of the Muslim Brotherhood's government. Since 2014, demonstrations were prohibited in Egypt, but the violence of the state against the bodies of the dissidents continue, and forced disappearances and arbitrary detentions, including women political activists, are still there. And this is the tragic situation that prompted prominent organizations such as Nazra for Feminist Studies to publish a statement a few days ago to defend women human rights defenders in Egypt. So what are the strategies that Egyptian women artists have, including Bahia, have found to continue to be resilient in this context? Some stopped producing graffiti. Indeed, painting graffiti was a transgressive act that crossed a number of borders: decency, public space, gender barriers. It was an art for a revolutionary moment, not a counter-revolutionary moment. Bahia continues her activities, has in a way dislocated her activity of doing graffiti outside Egypt. In a way, her art is on exile. She has painted walls around the world, inspired by the verses of the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. I use lines from his poetry, she says, to tell the world that ideas cannot be killed, to show that we are united in our humanity and our struggle against oppression and dictatorship. Clearly the position of Mahmoud Darwish, himself exiled for a long period of his life, and the poet of people's dispossession is inspiring for her. He's also an icon of Arab culture, and as such, he speaks to both the migrants from Arab backgrounds in Europe and European lovers of poetry. And here are some works, and this is in Paris, the first one is in Tokyo, this is in Honolulu, and this is Antwerp, and this is very close to you, near Lincoln University. Meanwhile, what is happening in Cairo? Graffiti almost disappeared from downtown Cairo, but the experience of street art of the revolution continues in the marginal spaces. The artist Hoda Lutfi, who is also a feminist historian and one of the most appreciated contemporary artists in the Arab world, has developed a long experience of work with homeless and refugee children, an area that lacks institutional support. In the past 2 years, Hoda Lutfi has been very much involved in social projects in Esbet Karalla, which you can see in this photo, one of the informal neighborhoods in Cairo, where together with an architect and another artist, she built a theater out of recycled material, and the community today uses this space to organize performance and to host performance. More recently, new artistic projects have been developed in Esbet Heralla. A young woman artist took inspiration from oral histories she collected from people in the neighborhood, mostly Nubian migrants who relocated there in the 70s for her artistic productions. The experience of producing art in this space aims at creating social cohesion, but also to contrast the stereotype that people from downtown and from the good neighborhoods have about the informal neighborhoods, normally labeled as dirty, unsafe, and violent. To conclude, and these are some photos that I took recently in Esbet Heralla. The relationship of women's arts to the public space in contemporary Egypt has been shaped by the experience of the revolution, and it changed over the past 9 years. If the first years saw an explosion of street art, including women's street art, which was conceived like an ephemeral archive of the revolution, the growing militarization of the public space did not allow anymore the production of street art in the two areas that during the revolution had seen the majority of graffiti to appear, the central area. Street art has been moving now to other spaces, called the Ashawiyat, or informal neighborhoods, such as Esbet Heralla. Art is becoming also far more introspective, and artists are working a lot on memory, grief, and trauma, aspects that I could not touch in this presentation, but I can clearly see in the works of feminist artists. The third aspect that needs to be noted is the more and more frequent dislocation of art, and sometimes even the artists, to the transnational space. All these aspects deserve attention, and the aesthetics, cultural, and political outcomes are still unpredictable. Egyptian artists, especially, but not only women, are called today to make difficult choices that need to be read in the context of the challenging political circumstances they are living in. Their capacity of negotiating small spaces of expression that allow them to continue to produce art, to educate people to the aesthetic, and to transmit a feminist memory is what is art about today. To conclude with one of the Mahmoud Darwish quote that inspires Bahia's exhibition here and that we are celebrating tonight, producing art in Egypt and in the transnational space today is to stand at the corner of a dream and fight. Thank you.